Hi everyone. Welcome to another Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I am your host, Noor Kyle.
And I am her faithful sidekick, Mushtaq Ali.
Yeah, so thank you for joining us, whether you're here live or watching on the replay. We're so happy you're here. And I have to make a quick announcement. I want to put this right up front so we don't lose it in the mix. But I have moved, as far as our retreat goes, we have our retreat in India coming up in late August, early September, and we would be so excited to have you join us for that. We have the link to the landing page for that in the description. But I do need to announce that I have moved up the cutoff date for registration and payment to July 17th instead of July 18th because I have to think about the dateline and the fact that a lot of what we're coordinating is happening in India. So the 18th for me could be the 19th for people in India, and that's just not going to work. So July 17th it is. That is the date that you have to have your registration in and your payment complete. So keep that in mind, and if you need further information, you can always email us. Because time is kind of the essence at this point, it's probably best to reach out to us directly. So keep that in mind, and if you'd like to join us, I definitely look forward to hearing from you. Anything I need to add on that point, Mushtaq?
No, I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, so other than that, of course, the usual YouTube spiel. You can support us by liking, commenting, sharing our work, and of course, subscribing to our channel.
Or sending us copious amounts of money.
Yes, copious amounts of money. Pocket change, copious amounts of money. We appreciate your support very, very much. So thank you to all of you who have supported us in the past and are thinking
Who
of
will
doing
support
so.
us in the future?
Yeah, exactly. So, other than that, we are finalizing the way we want to have people join in on these live talks. So we will have more going out to our mailing list. If you'd like to get on that, I definitely recommend getting on our email list so you can stay in touch with us and all the things that we do. Or of course, join us on our Facebook group. We're going to be discussing how to join these live talks in our emails coming up. And because we want to make sure that we are, doing things in a good way, as they say, right?
Yeah. Basically, we want to protect the group from the inevitable internet trolls that pop up on these groups from time to time.
Yeah, we want to keep these high quality discussions with people who are genuinely enthusiastic about all of the things that we discuss here.
Yeah. And not here to, we get the number of comments that I just delete directed towards women on this group is a little disgusting, actually.
Yeah.
Entirely inappropriate. And so um, we're taking steps to make sure that things like that don't get to happen.
Yep. And to keep doing what we're doing as well.
Yeah.
So, thank you for understanding as we go through this little bit of a transition
Or
point.
not understanding. You don't have to understand.
Of course,
Put up with
but
us a little bit.
for those of you who are able to get on board with what we do and why we do it, it means a lot. So thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so onward to this discussion. So we are going to be thinking about the inner and outer requirements of the work this evening, this morning, this afternoon. So this is an important and essentially essential discussion for us to have because this is where it starts. Before you pursue a path, you kind of have to have your shit together in order to be in a position to know what you want and to go after it. And it's hard to know what we want before we get there, but it's like a drive in your gut. And we'll be talking more about that as we go. Where should we get started, Mushtaq?
We should get started with what the work is and what the work isn't. What does it mean to be a dervish? And especially in the West, but not just in the West, people mistakenly think that one gets into the work as a form of therapy, and it's not a form of therapy. Therapy is what you do to get yourself together enough to get into the work. And I, and this is not to say that there aren't people who do therapy and do the work, but they tend to be a little bit separate. A good example of that is Robert Frager. I forget what his Muslim name is off the top of my head, but he's a sheikh of the Halveti Jarahi order, who is also a top-notch psychologist, founder of one of the premier modern psychological universities here in literally in walking distance to the house. Um, but people make that mistake, and they come to the work, whether it's us or anybody else doing the work, for the wrong reason. And you have to sometimes, if a lot of people who are in the work do not have the skills to do psychotherapy. And some of us don't want to do psychotherapy. And so there is this preparatory phase. In Arabic, they call this person a salik, somebody who's a seeker. And it requires that before you can really commit yourself to the work, you do some of the remedial stuff.
Yeah, that's the word we often use for it.
Yes. There is a major difference between the work, which is generative, and therapy, which is remedial. And it has to be the right kind of therapy because, as the quote on our blurb today says, most people are not psychologically broken. They're merely philosophically ignorant. And so if you're broken, the work is not for you. The work will break you more. And people, the good teachers that I know, realize this and will not take certain people. They will recommend them to other places first. Yeah, we have a list of people who are working to help heal trauma, for instance, that do a good job and are not culty. And you need to do a little bit of that before you get into the word. But does it, do you have to be perfect? No, you don't.
There's always, yeah, there's always a little bit of mixing between the remedial and the generative.
But if you are suffering from serious PTSD, it behooves you to address that first before you do anything else. The
Yeah,
work is not designed to address PTSD.
and I think I've used the word triage before.
Yeah, triage is such a messy word.
Sometimes appropriate, though, especially when you're in a high reactivity state and your triggers are running hot. It's that time where you might want to take a look and perhaps embrace the fact that you have some stuff to work through, you have some stuff to take care of, some self nurturing to do.
And within the milieu of the tarika, of the work, you will get tools that will help you to deal with some of that stuff. But you need to remove the big stuff, so a year in therapy is, if you have a good therapist, this is my opinion, so of course it's correct. Um, a good therapist will get you to the root of the problem and through the root of the problem in a year or less. We aren't talking about this Freudian stuff where you spend 20 years on a couch talking about how mean your mother is to you. It's I met a graduate of Freudian psychology, Freudian therapy once. She had spent 20 years in therapy and she graduated as a well-adjusted neurotic. Most boring human being I've ever met. Literally, it's like, there's nothing there. That's not what we want. What you need to do is look at your life and go, how much reactivity do I have? How much does my reactivity get in the way of my ability to develop the things that I need to develop to actually do the work? And the things that you need to develop to do the work are generative. They are not remedial. So remedial, you take care of the traumas of your childhood or the traumas of your youth or the traumas of your adulthood, because there's a lot of traumas. The generative is you do the things that turn you from a reactive, wounded creature into a regular human being. You develop conscience, you develop foresight, you develop empathy, you develop compassion, you develop a sense of self-awareness, you develop a sense of connectedness to the universe. You develop all of these things. And that moves you to what we usually call human adulthood. People don't like that subject, but we'll mention it anyway, and then you can forget about it. The work of Sufism is the work of an adult human being, not a wounded child. Is this making any kind of sense? Who wants to burn us at the stake? Because we are
Oh,
poking at a sacred
thanks,
cow.
Todd. Thanks. Much appreciated. Any thoughts or questions so far? Rebuttals, even? No. Okay.
I just want to throw one thing in that crossed my mind when Mushtaq was saying about human adulthood and how a lot of people didn't like it. I actually like the term, but one of the things that crossed my mind was the idea of a wild human as opposed to a domesticated human. And I'm just curious what you might have to say on that.
Oh, we've talked about that at length, and that's
Sorry.
shame, shame.
Spilled my tea again. Carry on.
So, wild humans are an interesting idea. Um, and the thing I like to use as an example is wolves and dogs. Wolves and dogs are so closely related genetically that they can breed and produce fertile young. Think about that for a second. If a wolf and a dog make baby pups, those pups will grow up and can mate with either wolves or dogs and produce healthy live offspring. That's how close they are. And most of the time, if you have animals that are close, you end up with mules, which are animals that are interesting, but not fertile. They cannot reproduce. The difference between a wolf and a dog is one thing. I mean, dogs come in all sorts of shapes now, but that's our fault. So the behavior of a wolf and a dog for the first maybe 18 months is identical. So think about dogs you have known, and they're happy-go-lucky, they are submissive to the human beings and all like that. One day with wolves, that all changes. Totally changes. They are no longer puppies. They become adults. And their behaviors change. You cannot train an adult wolf. The best you can do is negotiate with them. And they realize that they don't have to honor any agreements that they make beyond that moment. They can renegotiate their agreements anytime they want. But a dog stays a puppy its whole life. And this is something that we know about. This is a process called neoteny. Neoteny is the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood. And every domesticated animal, with the exception of your house cat, has been bred for neoteny. House cats have been bred too, but house cats have the power to go feral at any time because they are an animal that domesticated itself, which is kind of weird. They moved in on us. So an adult human being is somebody who has moved from the perpetual larval state that most people live in, which is the state of a child, into the state of an adult. And adult human beings' behaviors change from the larval state. And part of the work is to create adults, to move you from perpetual childhood into the adult state sometime before you die. And the child state is the remedial state. We get stuck there. And so you don't get 35-year-olds, really. You get a 15-year-old with 20 years of practice.
Would you say that part of that is victimhood? People like being victims?
No, I'd say that it goes deeper than that. People liking being victims is an effect, not a cause.
Okay.
What makes you a victim? Nora and I were talking about this, at least peripherally, earlier today. What makes people victims in general?
They perceive that they don't take responsibility for themselves. They perceive that things are other people's fault.
I would boil it down to a lack of agency.
That covers a lot of bases.
Yeah.
And it points to the fact that victimhood ends up being an effect rather than a cause in itself.
Now, does this mean that people can't come and abuse you? No. I like to quote good old Chairman Mao, all politics comes out of the barrel of a gun. Think about it. If you break laws in any country, men with guns show up. Now it's men and women with guns show up and force you to do things. So where is your agency in that? And the agency is not this bullshit notion that you cause everything that happens to you. That is one of the most evil thoughts that has come out of the whole New Age movement. And people who tell you that need to be hit upside the head with a rubber chicken.
Would Nelson Mandela be a good example of a person who managed to maintain agency despite everything he went through?
I never met the man, but I would not be surprised. That's one of the things that made him so dangerous, is because they could lock him up, but they could not take away his agency, because agency boils down to you get to choose the response to the situation, whatever it is. Your response belongs to you. And if the stories about Mandela are true, it sure looks like that's what he did. Viktor Frankl talked about this at length, uh, especially with his observations about people trapped in Nazi death camps, and the ones who lived and the ones who didn't. Too long to go into right now, but if you're interested, Frankl's work is meaningful.
Any thoughts so far from others? What's coming up for you guys?
Something did occur to me, but I'll have to try and formulate it before I know myself whether it's a comment or a question. So the work with capital W is not psychotherapy. That I'm well aware of from different sources and experiences. When I started taking an interest in information about the work, when I started noticing the projection of the work, I guess I was around 20, so that's quite a long time ago. And I remember that I had to keep on asking myself what my motivation was for my interest with um, formulations, traditions, or projections of the work. In my case, my first meeting with remarkable men was via Gurdjieff, and I used to ask myself, where is this interest coming from? What is my motivation? What's my real purpose? Is it something psychological, or is it something more, or something else? And is there a difference? So 30 plus years later, I have to confess I still find myself asking this question. So I guess my question is, could it be that the circumstance that I didn't manage to find solutions in the world, in inverted commas, so I didn't manage to find solutions for my questions in psychotherapy or any other kind of remedial offer? Would it be legitimate for me to take this as proof that I am qualified to follow the work, even if it means returning to the remedial aspects again and again, whenever required?
That's a really excellent question.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so I also got into this when I was about 20, which was 50 years ago. And I still ask myself, what is my purpose? What is my intention? Almost every day. Not because I don't know, but because I am checking to make sure that I haven't drifted off course. And it's very easy to drift off course. Maybe there is somebody in the world who is absolutely perfect, they got all of that thing going and they will never ever make any mistakes. They are infallible.
Never
I
get
have never met
distracted.
them, and I know for sure that it isn't me. It's not even Noor. She comes close, but it's not her either. So that question that you're asking yourself, to me, that's like pinging. That's like sending out a sonar to see what bounces back. And that's a good thing. I have watched people with the best of intentions and really good skills who haven't done this and didn't take care of their shit manage to drift off into really bad places. As I've said before, I had two really good friends, both of whom became cult leaders. And I think it's up to three now. And that's a
And yeah,
terrible thing.
yeah.
For those of us who presume to teach, this is one of the big traps that we can start believing our own press and thinking that we know everything. And we don't ask ourselves, am I on the right path? Am I doing the right work? And so we must do that.
Well, I think in my experience, it's every single day that I'm always trying to investigate to perhaps reaffirm or even interrogate at times. What am I doing? What is my purpose? And that doesn't have to be a threatening activity. As Mushtaq said, I think it can be like, sending out that ping and seeing what comes back.
Yeah. And having friends. Friends are important. So Noor gets to keep me in check. I get to keep her in check. And our close students do the same thing. I've seen all these sacred holy people, blessed of the angels and everything, who uh, get really upset if somebody questions them. And you'll notice that the people who hang out here, like Cherie, for instance, has no problem questioning me or Noor. And it's one of the things that we value her for.
Yep. Sheree gives a thumbs up in agreement. So
Is that something here?
Anissa says, you guys mentioned that it's a back and forth, and I agree with this. Since the work is always watching yourself, I'm gonna make my chat box bigger. Since the work is always watching yourself, you get to question certain reactions that come up that you weren't familiar with before and question them. Because since we as human beings are not complete nor perfect, we're ever changing. So, with that, our behaviors and traumas evolve and change and heal and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, what she said.
Yep, I mean, we are not the same person every time we wake up after sleep. So,
Especially considering some of the nights we've had lately.
it's been too hot to sleep. So, we do have to check in with ourselves and not just step into this autopilot where we believe that these things are, that our meaning is just resolved, never have to revisit that again. What are we doing with our lives? When we create an aim, which we have talked about before, it's something that we always renew, reaffirm.
Yeah. And to the second part of your question, yeah, you're at a point where you're ready to do the work and you can stop doubting that. It's okay.
Thank you for coming back to that, Mushtaq. I think
Yeah,
that was
that's important.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Osama has his hand raised.
Yes.
Lay it on us, Osama. Like people
Um,
think I'm Donald or Biden. Whoever is slurring his words.
I'm
right.
stuttering tonight. All right. Anyway, Osama.
That's the effect that it has on us. Um, so as I hear Osama share that, um, questioning this one's intention. I was doing that this morning, matter of fact, and this past couple of days, as I'm writing and reflecting and observing myself, I find myself coming back to this question over and over. What am I doing again? What is this? Get into the asking myself, what is sincerity even? Um, in my pursuit, in my desire, what am I really desiring here? And I'm not gonna lie, to hear both of you say, I ask myself into this question, it terrifies me but wait a second. I'm gonna be asking myself the question for another 20, 50 years. Um, and the interesting thing, another another part, which is what you shared, Mushtaq, about, you're having some three friends that turned out to be cult leaders or whatever. Well, I don't know if that's what it is, but whatever. Um,
Yeah, that was pretty much what it was. They
oh,
became
okay.
leaders.
Oh,
I've got one myself now, so it
that's great.
happens.
But
Great.
the thing is with that is for me, the only projection, the only manifestation maybe, or the only example that I have of people that maybe stopped asking that question are people who are in some kind of religious, they're turned into religiosity in some sense. So if I look at some of the Naqshbandis, the turban and all that, they do emanate some level of certitude that that doubt is no longer there, at least from projection manifestation. Now, truthfully, I don't know. Um, but as far as the certitude in the conviction of who they are and how they perceive the world, um, it does seem that that question is no longer a question, is no longer an issue, um, which is attractive in some kind of sense for me, because if I'm asking myself, hey, what's my sincerity here? What's this? What is this again? Um, which in some kind of sense, it does it is doubt. I don't know if it's doubt really, but it does seem like doubt if I'm asking myself, what is this? Um, and it is terrifying.
Yeah, and the terror of the situation is important. Um, what it is, in my estimation, is that part of you that would like to remain a child. So you have the guys with the big turbans, and their sheikh is the grand sheikh of the golden chain, not just the sheikh of the silsila, but the grand sheikh or the great grand sheikh. The titles get longer. And according to their followers, this guy's this guy is actually the Qutub al-Zaman, right? He's like completely infallible. Everything that he says is true. And no matter how stupid the ideas he comes up with are, they will never be questioned. And if you do question them, you will be met with hostility. And if you keep up with the questioning, you will be driven out. And this is not speculative. I've watched this happen to people.
Yeah, I believe you.
Yeah, the
Now,
great grand sheikh pronounced unto his followers one time that women who were pregnant should never have ultrasounds because ultrasounds would destroy the DNA of the baby. And they all went, ooh, ooh, okay. How cool. We should never have ultrasounds. And they never stopped to question, what do you mean? What evidence do you have for this to be true? Because the evidence would always be, God told me, and I'm infallible. There are several things like this. Um, Certain sheikhs get into prescribing medicine that they should never, they don't have medical backgrounds, they don't know anything about it. They should just shut up. But
so
they don't.
I'm with you on, as a student, right? One must question that authority, right? Like, hey man, I think what you're saying is kind of crazy right here. Now, what do you think for that person, not the students, but for the individual, what happens or happened that made someone go from questioning that sincerity to um that
Believe
certitude?
your
Like,
own press.
okay.
That's how I think of it usually, believing your own press.
So even for the sheikh, sure, but what about from the student's point of view, where suddenly there's just complete trust to the point where there's no questioning? I mean, I'm also thinking of this on the individual level of like, I'm sorry, Osama, for kind of taking this and running with it. So the person who has
It's probably Adrian that actually comes in. So go ahead, and then I want to get back to his question.
Yes. Just, so if outside of the sheikh, like not placing the meaning making on the sheikh, but this sense of the the person coming into a community, they've been searching for meaning. Now they've come to this community and they feel like they're at peace now. Everything has been sorted out. The questions no longer need to be asked in terms of their own search. That's kind of how I understood this.
Yeah, I don't think that's what he was asking, though.
Well, okay. Osama, would you?
Osama, clarify for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was asking for the person, the sheikh himself in this particular
Oh,
instance,
okay. Okay.
or just individual. It doesn't even have to be a teacher or whatnot. Um, Now, yes, the examples that I have turn out to be, maybe sheikhs or, you know, but I don't know too many cult leaders, but maybe maybe those,
Do a few.
maybe that will be, but like, um, yeah, that I'm talking about that specific person. When does that person go from that sincerity to, or questioning that sincerity, or question like, hey, what am I doing again? To like, oh, I know without a doubt. I don't even have to question. I don't, that question does not even come to the surface anymore.
Okay.
It's already resolved, gone.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry that I misunderstood Osama, but
Oh, no worries.
Yeah, so there are generally two answers to that. The first is the simple one. The teacher is a con man. He is talking his talk to get whatever it is that he wants to get. That's relatively easy. The second answer is more complex because the second answer is that teacher has not dealt with their shit yet. And it will, their ego will catch on their shit. In my own personal experience, there was Anissa asks, would that be more or less with practice growing our centers? Yes, that's one way to look at it. So I had a really good friend, Englishman. Uh, Even Englishmen can be likable from time to time. But he had worked with a whole bunch of people. He had been a student of Bennett's. He had been a student of Idris Shah's. He had been a student of Bulent Ralph. Uh, and then he became Mev Levy. And they made him a sheikh. There's some questions about that. And the best answer that I got from uh, the people who were in the know was he was made a sheikh because he wanted it so bad. And they figured they would give it to him and see what happened. And what happened was he stopped doing the work. He wanted that authority more than he wanted the truth. And over time, he became more and more autocratic, more and more high control, and to the point where he had to leave the US. He lost all of his students here, and he at one point had a pretty big following. And I got to watch all of this. I was never his student, but I was his friend, and I hung out with him a lot back in the day before he got all crazy and wanted to be the ultimate grand sheikh of the universe. And let's just say the universe humbled him. And that's often the story. If you don't deal with your shit on a regular basis and you are put in the position of being a teacher, that shit is going to turn into a monster that will bite you in the ass. And what it looks like is it looks like trying to hold on to one particular crystallization of reality. Somebody, this is Todd who said, yes, as we have discussed before, even wise people can become less than wise after spending a long time surrounded by yes men.
Yep.
That reminds me of another friend of mine who became a cult leader. Martial arts cult, totally different thing, but not really.
Does that help answer your question?
Oh yeah, and especially that line about crystallization.
Mm-hmm.
That was spot on. Thank you so much.
Okay, if you understood that, it's not my fault. I didn't do it, you did it.
Okay. Thanks, Osama. Cherie's been waiting very
Yeah.
patiently.
I was going to remind Mushtaq about when we first met, and I had a teacher who was dearly loved. It's still dearly loved, but I was having difficulty with the teaching because he was starting to say things that I was going, that's a bit odd, that's a bit strange. And then I'd run it past Mushtaq, and I'd only just met Mushtaq. And I didn't realize, but we actually had this mutual connection with this person.
Yep,
And
he was my student years ago.
for 5 years, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Or something.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this particular person, he was really revered, and his teaching was wonderful, just wonderful. But as a human being, his health was taking a savage toll on his mind. So when he wasn't teaching, he would say some really strange and ridiculous things. And Mushtaq helped me understand about this is a human. He is still a human. And he really wanted me to be unquestioning in everything that uttered out of his mouth. So when he was in teaching mode, it was beautiful. And I'd write it down and I'd look at it and it was great. But then there was other things that were creeping in, and it started to get my hackles raised. And I had to think about, do I continue sitting with this person? And we tried to help him a lot because he's actually in California. And I had to come to a very hard decision to not call him ever again, because I decided that this person was actually now trying to poison me against Mushtaq. So I really had to go deep inside myself in my own instinct and recognize what really was the truth, and recognize that both Mushtaq and this person are human beings, but who was still continuing to speak truth and who was allowing me to speak. Because as Mushtaq said at the beginning, I'm allowed to question, I'm allowed to object, I'm allowed to do all these things.
Not just allowed to, we rely on you for that.
Well, it's very hard to have a conversation that's only one side, isn't it?
Mhm.
So why can't we say, I don't understand this, why is this so important? And so when this person was trying to shut me down, I realized he had slipped into something that was no longer a certitude of truth. If I could use your word, Osama, that certitude, I realized, was also conning me into continually accepting this friend, this teacher friend, everything he said. And so I've had a tiny bit of feedback from a person who's still in contact with him, and Mushtaq knows who I'm talking about, who says that he's completely lucid. The teacher is completely lucid, but it's not often. And for me, if time is short and valuable, I only want to spend it with people where I'm being challenged and I can continually to challenge back because I think this is a two-way street.
Yeah,
So,
and it's nice to be treated as an adult.
yeah, because if I was treated as a child and a female child, you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to have an opinion, you're not allowed to interrupt. That's when my hackles were starting to raise, and I'm thinking, what is going on? This person is changing. So his particular health issues was affecting his mind when he wasn't teaching, and so I had to lovingly let him go. And
Yeah, and that was not easy for you.
no, it's not easy because I still respect his teaching, but when he's not teaching, he's not a person that I can sit with. Does that help? I hope so.
I think so, yeah. So
Thanks, Sheree.
we have to make sure that we get over the remedial stuff. This is a minefield. So the image behind me tonight, see all of that?
How would you describe it for the people
So
who
that
aren't visual?
is a huge courtyard in front of a mosque. And in Western literature, spiritual literature, they talk about going through the chapel perilous. And that's where you go through and you confront all of this stuff. And ideally, you come out the other end and you're all awake and everything. And then you can go on and find the Holy Grail. And it's all cool. I think of this as our modern version of the chapel perilous, which I think of as the spiritual marketplace. Out there are all sorts of people who would really like to sell you something. And you have to navigate through that and get to the other end and get through one of those doors to take you to someplace real. And it ain't easy. I've been disappointed in that more times than I can. I'll give you an example. I don't usually talk about this, but this is a good point. My first sheikh died during the Iranian Revolution. And for years, I never found another teacher, but I would hang out with various sheikhs, hoping that I would find somebody who I could study with. And there was this one guy who I thought for a while might be worth staying with. All of his students referred to him as the master. And I wasn't crazy about that because, I mean, I'm an American. We don't do masters. We don't do kings, none of that shit. But I put up with it and figured master, self-master, not master over people. But with him, it turned out to be master over people. And he started doing, about a year into hanging out, he started doing some interesting things. One of which was demanding that his dervishes go out and find him girlfriends.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, find me a girlfriend. I'm lonesome. I miss my home country. And the only thing that will help me is a young, beautiful woman. Go find me one. And they would literally go out and work to find him women. And it wasn't like you could just find a professional lady. It had to be a young, beautiful, intelligent, gullible woman who would buy a shit. After watching this for a couple of weeks to see what was really going on, I walked out the door and never came back to that place. I think my thought at the time was, I have enough trouble finding a girlfriend for myself. I don't need to be doing this kind of shit for somebody else. But seriously, that was bad news, and that came from somebody who had worked themselves into a position of ultimate authority.
Hmm.
Whatever they wanted was right because they wanted it.
No
James, you have a
question.
thought?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm actually backtracking a bit, but this stuff seems almost depressingly predictable. In
Yeah,
that
it is actually.
I've had a revelation. Let me guess. You can sleep with all. I must sleep with other women. Yeah, thought so. It's just, yeah. So the popular theory that's often bouncing about the bad gurus are specifically narcissistic, like they had a narcissistic tendency since childhood, in terms of a fully fledged disorder, not just human narcissism. That, or can it be that simply absolute positions of power will bring out narcissism in anyone,
It's a good
or a bit of
question,
both?
and I don't have a perfect answer for that. In some case, I think that a little bit of narcissism is going to be there. I don't know that it's going to be malignant, at least not at first.
Yeah.
But underneath that, uh, another friend of mine who became a cult leader, he was Native American and or part Native American actually, and he was a well-trained medicine man. I knew some of his teachers because his teachers were from where I was from, and he was good. And then one day he announced that he had been invested with this mantle of the ultimate teacher, the head of all of the lineages of all of the medicine men of all of the world. And it was like this weird flip, but I realized that I should have seen it coming because he was incredibly insecure. And that built him up.
Well, I mean, not everybody copes with insecurity that way, but I would imagine when you already have, I mean, he already had a good amount of authority already.
Yeah, and he probably had way more imposter syndrome than I had realized at the time. My only excuse was I was young.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
Um,
And I loved this guy, and his students were wonderful. I used to teach his students all the time. He would have me come down there, and we would hang out, and we would have a good time. And um, and then he just went overboard one day. I know exactly, I down to the day, I know when it was. It was in the summer of 1986.
all right.
Yeah.
So,
So,
Osama's tugging us back to the
yeah, back to the topic, which we need to get to the good part of.
okay. Osama A says, returning to the remedial bit, does the work include precepts or techniques for remedying states or aspects of oneself that hinder the work? For example, when I'm feeling grief beyond a certain point, I can't remember myself. He's talking about self remembering, the practice of self remembering. So, my question is, to what extent can the work itself actually be remedial? I'm reading this as how can it support remedial work?
Yeah, and the answer is it can, but that's not its main thrust. And the work will support you doing remedial work as you go, because as far as I can tell, that never ends. Maybe you'll come to a point where all of your remedial work is done. I haven't, nor hasn't. I,
No.
I have never met anybody who has. And if they say that they have, they're a damn liar because behavior is truth. And Nora will tell you there are times when I stop and I say, I had this event that brought this thing up with me that I haven't even thought about for 40 years. And I realized that it's been affecting me my whole life, and I've got to change it now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shit happens, and the work has tools for that. The work is not for dealing with primary traumas. If your parents tortured you throughout your childhood, you need a psychotherapist. You need a good one. Don't see a Freudian. See somebody else.
I
And
was actually thinking of less dramatic things like your girlfriend broke up with you.
yeah,
So
that's what I'm saying. The work has tools for that kind of stuff. It doesn't have tools for primary trauma, and it's not supposed to.
Jonathan, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I wanted to make a suggestion that the, the generative work could be looked at as a slow and gentle removing of buffers, and that the remedial work is is a situation where buffers actually need to be put back in place because the person is is not stable. A buffer is like a means we use to ignore a contradiction in our lives. So in the case of the breaking up with a girlfriend, you might be in a very distressed state, and you're all unstable. So a buffer needs to be inserted to prop the person up like that. The buffer is like a kind of a lie. So you might say to the person and encourage the person, you're a wonderful person. It wasn't your fault, and whatever it needs to pick them up again so they can glue themselves back together again. But a person doing the work that's already together and is ready for the work is someone that is ready to have a lie exposed in a gentle way.
Sometimes not so gentle, but I
Yep.
prefer gentle.
We all prefer gentle. Sometimes if you're stubborn, you get more than gentle.
Yeah.
But Anissa had a observation question.
So, first of all, Osama A says that works for him. Thanks, Jonathan. I before we skip ahead to other things, I want to say sometimes I think of remedial work as healthy ego building. And then generative work is like often challenging to the ego. And it's good to have a resilient, healthy ego to the extent that you can in place when you're going through challenge. So that's kind of how I think about it. Jonathan used the language of buffers. I think those are kind of along the same track. All right. Thanks for that. Todd. Yes, please share what you'd like to share.
Well, part of it has been my own sort of self-examination and doubts. And I had considered all of this many times and came to the conclusion that the reparative work is not done and never will be. But if I wait until I
Can
am
you speak up a little bit?
Sorry.
Sorry, the headphones here are having issues. Can you hear me at all?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. That if I waited until I was perfectly ready and everything was fine, I would never have, perhaps I would have perhaps if I'd waited more and done more of the reparative work, I might have gotten further, but I wouldn't be anywhere yet, except still working on the reparative part. And I think doing both to the extent that they're useful and possible is a good thing.
Yeah, I think you've misunderstood me here. I'm not
Okay.
saying that you stop doing, you do the remedial work until it's done, and then you do the generative. It's
And
not
that's
what I'm
not,
saying.
Oh no,
I,
no. I was talking to, or I was referring to Jonathan's part, and also that the nature of the generative and the reparative work is not so easily is not is not so easily split as to one is the comforting lies and one is the unpleasant truths. A lot of the reparative work is learning how is being able to find certain truths, as opposed to the lies that we've had. And some of the generative, well, yeah, that simple dichotomy and the simple splitting, I think, is unfair to the people and unfair to the complexities of both forms of work.
Yeah. And Anissa comments to you, it's a balance between the two, right?
Todd is on board with that.
Yeah. And
I
she
mean, I think,
another comment up here, I don't want to let it slip by. She says, you just give yourself time to feel that I would say, and you go back to work when you're giving yourself enough time to experience those feelings. No, you have tools to work with the feelings. It's not just you sit with them, though that's part of it. You, when something comes up, you sit with it. You ask yourself certain questions like, where is this in my body? What does it relate to? You breathe through whatever emotions come up. There are a whole bunch of things that you do. So in a sense, yes, but deeper than that. And you have to realize that when you start the work, that has to take primacy over the stuff. So let's say there's the stuff and then there's the work. And you're never going to get rid of all your stuff, as far as I can tell, but you need to get your stuff in order to the point where you can do the work. And I think of it like there are some people who are really into this whole inner child thing. You know, you have your inner child and it's at a certain age and you go in and you talk to it and you pet it and you tell it that it's a good boy or a good girl and all of this stuff. As far as I'm concerned, the only value to an inner child is to help the kid grow up. You know, I don't need a wounded 10-year-old somewhere in my head that is constantly giving me, you know, vibes from that. I need to take that part of me and encourage it to mature into adulthood. That's the only value I can see to the inner child. But it's great for those people who teach inner child stuff because they can keep you on the hook for years. And this is a problem with all of these guys behind me. You know, you have people who do so-called trauma work, and they will work you through your trauma. And then they'll work you through your trauma again, and then again, and then again, and then again. For 10, 15 years, you're going through your
yeah,
trauma. And
revisiting. And then new stuff comes up and you're stuck in that. The trauma does not stop coming. So what do? Do you just, fixate on that?
and that's what some of those people back there in the spiritual marketplace, that's what they would like you to do because they've got you for life then. I
Or
know people
that's
who are
what they
doing,
think you should do. That is progress for them in your life.
yeah, I know people who have been doing that kind of work for 20 years, and it's ridiculous. It doesn't take 20 years to deal with your traumas. And, you know, like I said, we have friends who do that kind of work in a real way. So you can see the difference between people who just recirculate their traumas over and over again, have a cathartic experience, feel better for a week, and then they're back doing their trauma.
Wondering why they don't feel good still. Osama.
Yeah, question. Does the work, or do people in the work have a what is the word that I'm looking for? Definition, characters of what the mature human being looks like, what the insan al-kamil, the perfected human is, right? Because I feel maybe for myself, there's some kind of a projected image that I'm working towards, or I'm trying to define, I'm trying to find my way through to get to that image, that ideal. And it's funny because you talked about this crystallization, right? I mean, that is some kind of form of crystallization, this image, this projected image. So is there a definition of what this insan al-kamil is, this perfected human? Is that a thing?
Yes.
Okay.
That is absolutely a thing. Let me address this one thing because I want to make sure I understand it first, and then we will get to that because that's important because that's part of the generative work. So Anissa says, doing the practice on a daily basis is an important reminder that
that those are passing things and you get to focus on the bigger picture.
By practice, do you mean reliving the trauma?
It's basically doing the work.
Doing the work, yeah. Reliving trauma over and over again is not doing the work, but doing the work is doing the work.
Yes, and Todd says, going back 50 years to, quote, let it all hang out, unquote, I always wondered, quote, what do you do then? Cut it off, unquote.
Freud would have way too much fun with that question. Just saying. So, Anissa, did I answer your question? Am I completely off base? Did I misunderstand you? Because I would prefer not to do that.
I just meant by doing the work on a daily basis, you get to actually know what's important and what it's not. And you get to focus, you basically just focus on the bigger pictures, which is everything is passing, and your whole like identity isn't, I don't know what it really is, and it's much larger than this.
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Yep, I would say that that's absolutely correct. Thank you for clarifying. Sometimes I'm denser than others, so it helps.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, the insan al-kamil, it's not the goal, it's the process. Probably if you truly reached the ultimate state of insan al-kamil, it would be as you took your last breath. Because up until then, the work goes on. My estimation. Other people are going to claim that they're already there, but I call bullshit on that too. I know this because my sheikh said that I have a superpower. And that superpower is the ability to piss anyone off. And I was noted for going into some of these great teachers and having them in a screaming rage fit at me within minutes, totally out of control. And so one has to assume that their insani karma is not entirely polished up yet.
So Anissa is sort of, you guys kind of, had answers at the same time. She was saying something similar to you, Mushtaq, like, but al-insan al-kamil is the goal, right? It's not our attainment of that goal, but the journey.
Yes, exactly correct.
So, I mean, to think you're there, that is crystallization. Because part of this process is the fact that no day is the same as the day before, and we're always being challenged by new things. I'm sorry, Osama, go ahead. I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, so what is it? What is the
Okay.
perfected man, right? What is this goal that I'm saying my orientation is in this direction and that's where I'm going?
I prefer the completed human to perfected man because I think it's a better translation and more respectful to all humanity.
We did a couple talks on this,
Yeah.
like half a year ago, maybe a year ago,
Yeah,
even.
real quick. The completed human being has a conscience, has a real conscience, has an objective conscience. And the completed human being has quieted their nafs, has moved from the commanding nafs to the nafs at rest. The completed human being has the ability to exercise foresight, future pacing, and to make choices about their behavior that align with their true aims and goals, as opposed to the imperatives that come up from the conditioning that one might have.
So this is something more advanced than being a human adult. That's like the starting point.
Yeah. The human adult is as close as we need to get to insani kama. But you can work on it more.
All right.
So James said something there. Would you like to take that, Noor?
Sure, I'll read it. James says, for a few years now, I've assumed that the work unlocks resources that might also be applied to further enhance remedial work, but does not automatically guarantee that application.
That's undoubtedly true. And if you have big chunks of remedial work that you need to take care of, it won't unlock them until after you've taken care of it. But it does have part of the work is learning to deal with the chief feature. You remembered the chief feature, right? If we understand our chief feature, or as Gurdjieff also like to call it, our chief fault, then we can understand how to do work on ourselves that is both generative and remedial.
Which is like what Todd was saying, how it's sort of like these things support each other. These processes are supporting each other as we go forward. Okay. Anissa says, well, yeah, she's asking for a
Very briefly, the chief feature is the place where you go in sleep. It can be called the fixation point, the point of the fixation of your attention. The Yoga Sutras said that yoga is the stilling of the mind. And when the mind is still, then the seer is in its proper place. But at all other times, the seer is identified with that which is given to it to see. And that's fixation. So it could be the world is a scary place. That could be your fixation. Could be, I am really angry about something. Could be, I'm totally confused. Who the hell am I anyway? Any of these things. It's a science in and of itself that unfortunately has been co-opted and turned into some sort of namby-pamby personality profile
Profile
thing.
test thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which has nothing to do with what Gurdjieff originally taught. And it doesn't even have anything to do with what Oscar Ichazo originally taught. Jesuits got hold of it, and you know how that goes. It's very bad.
They took a tool and they made it into a crystallization engine, basically.
Yep.
All right. So that helps. She says thank you.
Good. All right, we're getting up to the point where we're going to have to stop. I hope that we've covered enough of the generative work for people to have an idea of how it's different than the remedial. And for those people who might be listening to this who are dealing with trauma, there are some really good people out there who can help you with this and won't keep you in a trauma loop forever. So check around. If you need to, drop a message in the comments and we can maybe point you to some people who do this kind of work. But if you are a fairly well-adjusted neurotic, then this is the place for you.
Yeah. Welcome. Yeah. I mean, as Mushtaq was saying, we have our own stuff that we are constantly growing through and working on and re-encountering. And for us, that's part of our path. It's important to be able to do that in a way that allows us to embrace that process rather than be afraid of it. Fear will come up. It's another thing to use as a propellant, really. The thing is not to, at least in my opinion, to see every bit of resistance that comes up in us is an opportunity for growth, even when that appears impossible, appears untrue. So, Osama asks, would you guys perhaps like to do a talk dedicated to this cheap feature topic? I remember that concept from Gurdjieff, but would really appreciate some real insights.
Yeah,
So,
we have done some talks on that.
yeah. It requires a bit more depth, though, and
yeah. Keep an eye out on the forum, and we can point you at some stuff.
yep, we will have some resources of a sort forthcoming on that front.
Yeah, I would appreciate that as well.
Good to know. Thank you. All right, any other questions or thoughts?
I did have something about goals because
Sure.
I spent most of my working life being an innovator. And one of the things I found was really helpful was to have goals that were well beyond any chance of ever achieving them in a reasonable time frame. But by having these very broad goals, it allowed me to think in a very broad way and to make concrete progress towards practical innovations. And to me, coming back to the thing about the al insan al kamil, um, to me, that's sort of a goal. Um, and another little twist on that is that my longtime teacher often talks about human beings as being a place where the finite and infinite can meet. And perhaps because I've got a mathematician's training, infinite to me doesn't mean just very big. It means it goes on forever. Um, so the idea that if there's a real infinite, that you could ever get there doesn't make sense to me at all. Um, Whatever you get to each point along the way, there's always going to be more to be realized.
Yeah, we've talked about that some time back, the necessity of having goals that are nearly unattainable. The completely out of this universe goal that you aim towards. And that seems to actually be pretty important.
Thanks for speaking to that, Ian. All right. Yeah, Adrian says a mirror can reflect the infinite.
Especially in a house of mirrors.
That, yes, pretty crazy experience, but an interesting metaphor. Any last thoughts, Mushtaq?
It's more fun than it sounds.
I mean, it is though. I think about all of the remedial work I've done and the generative work that has been done by me on top of that. I mean, intermixed, interspersed, both before, during, after that remedial work has been happening. And it has empowered me to do more generative work. And the generative work in turn has equipped me to go deeper into the remedial stuff. And I think that I am pretty thrilled to be able to say that because I remember where I was 10 years ago. And I remember how dark a place that was. I could not envision the degree of internal agency that I experience now. Which is not to say that I feel I've gotten exactly where I would like to see myself. But I feel driven to continue because I know that growth is possible, because I've seen it, I've experienced it, I've tasted it. So don't give up hope if you're feeling stuck. Give yourself some grace. And also, gird your loins, because this is challenging stuff.
Yeah, this is the work of adults.
Just a very small question to clear up what you said, Mushtaq, to Ian's comment or question about having difficult or impossible aims. Did I just wanted to understand, is it important to have them or is it important not to have them?
It's important to have them.
Right.
I think that it is important to have these a grand aim for your life.
Right.
One that it will be a miracle if you accomplish it. And yet you try. And along the way, you have smaller goals that all of a sudden create wonderful things. So I'm a great believer in grand goals. Like my goal is to train maybe hundreds of teachers who will take the work out into the world, not under me, under their own damned authority, and teach this stuff to as many people as possible so that the process of awakening is not lost to humanity. Having to rediscover all of this stuff would be tedious. So for me, that's my grand goal. And you are all my victims. I mean, my helpers.
Yep.
Great.
All right. So let me switch over to Brady Bunch mode. And here we all are.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I think Mr. Key might be at work right now, but thank you so much for showing up. It's great to have you. And everyone, thank you for
putting up with us yet again. Yeah,
contributing to the conversation, asking challenging questions, and sharing your thoughts in ways that are always contributing to the the meaning making that we're trying to do here. Yeah. All right. So I guess we can wave to each other, wave to everybody.
Bye, folks.
On the replay, we're going to go have dinner, but take good care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you soon.